How many's in there today? A lot. Okay. So I'll put these ones over here, and I'll answer these ones. The ones haven't got any good karma. Is that fair? No, it's not, is it? Okay, let's get onto it. Are the 7 factors of enlightenment a sequence? They can be. You're mindful, then you can investigate dhammas, explore dhammas, which gives you energy, etc. How do you relate to the jhana factors? The jhana factors, what's the 6th factor of enlightenment? The jhana factors? What? What?
Samadhi.
Samadhi. And what does samadhi mean? What's it defined as? Yes. So the 4 jhanas are the 6th factor of enlightenment in that sequence. That's how they relate. They're right in there, number 6. If all the questions are easy like that, so I can maybe finish this in my dreams. I have much mudita for the man whose sinus cancer was cured. Sadhu. Yeah, sometimes those things are really weird. He should be dead, but you're cured. How do we reconcile this with Ajahn Brahm not being able to cure his stroke, or Ayya Khema not being able to cure her cancer? These were both enlightened beings. Look, sometimes, why do you want all these people to be cured? They weren't long enough. Give them a break.
Excuse me, would you mind putting on your microphone?
I knew this was going easy. Now I've got to be a bit more careful what I say. It was not my microphone. Yeah. Okay. I have much mudita for the man whose sinus cancer was cured. How do we reconcile this with Ajahn Brahm not being able to cure his stroke, or Ayya Khema not being able to cure her cancer? These were both enlightened beings. Much metta to you, Ajahn. Why do you always want people to be cured? You've got to die sometime. Now, why didn't the Buddha cure? How did the Buddha die? Oh, I'm going off on tangents now, but I can't resist this. How did the Buddha die? Couldn't he cure that? Didn't he tell Ananda, Venerable Ananda, that as a being he could last to the end of the eon? So why didn't he? The reason why he didn't, because he didn't need to. He'd already got the wheel of Dhamma rolling. And not just that, I always like stating this, especially to the venerable nuns here, and anybody who ever wants to become a nun. Under the, was it the Bodhi tree or just after that one? I think under one of the trees, just after the Buddha's enlightenment, Mara came to him. And Mara, I've already mentioned, this kind of always wanted to control people, and just like a devil, like a demon, but very powerful. And he said to the Buddha, yes, okay, I admit it, you are fully enlightened. So teaching people is a really big burden. Why do you want to do that for? There'll be people who will argue with you, or people who will tell you, please put your microphone on. I don't mean that, you're just very kind. So why do you want to do that for? Just, okay, you're enlightened, just disappear, parinibbana, and have a nice life. There are some beings called Pacceka Buddhas. No, these are the silent Buddhas. So you can just be at peace and just disappear. The thing with Pacceka Buddhas, or these silent arahats, no one knows who they are. Oops. So the Buddha said, no, I will not go into parinibbana until I have established a strong sangha of monks. Is that misogynistic? No, because he said, and a strong sangha of bhikkhunis, and a strong group of, of devoted, half enlightened or most enlightened lay people, men and women. This is what's called the four parisa, the four groups: monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen. And until they're flourishing, stream winners, once returners, non-returners, full arahats, when they are all flourishing, then I'll realize I've done my job, and so I can then parinibbana. And when the Buddha was just 3 months short of his 80th birthday, then Mara came to the Buddha, and under the Chapala shrine in Vaisali, he said to the Buddha, you're getting on now, you're almost 80, and there's a flourishing sanghas of monks and bhikkhunis. There's a flourishing, a lot of laymen and laywomen with incredible meditation and deep insights. You've kept your end of the bargain. You've created this strong communities. So now, can you please enter parinibbana? And that's when the Buddha said, okay, I keep you my promise. And so he said, from 3 months from now, I will pass away. Enter parinibbana. The Buddha had a choice. He exercised that choice. He done his job. The sanghas, the lay communities, they would carry on. And Buddhism would not die out for a long, long time. And the proof is, we're still here today. So the Buddha said his part of the job had been done. So 3 months later, he passed away in Kusinara. Do you think that was his choice to pass away? I think you know where I'm going on this. Because sometimes when I say this, some traditional Buddhists think I'm crazy. Did the Buddha commit suicide? What is suicide? It's deliberately ending one's life. It's basically being so peaceful, the will to live disappears. What do you reckon? No? Then why did he die? Who killed him?
Because his five khandhas were not willing, so he just ended those five khandhas.
He ended them. So it was an act of will. So he did kill himself.
It was an act of no will, wasn't it?
It was no will, there was no deed. I'm just asking these questions.
Technicality.
It's not a technicality, it's much deeper than that. It's, why do things happen? Who does what? So I love saying things like that, but the main part of that story was that he had kind of a mission, a meaning for staying and teaching. And that mission was to create these strong sanghas. And one of the important parts of that statement, you can read it in the suttas, one of the most important part of that mission is to create a sangha of bhikkhunis. That was his mission. That's why he didn't pass away straight away. and bhikkhus, and laymen, laywomen, the whole works. And when that was completed, Mara said, okay, you can go now. And he did. And I mention that because there's still some people who say, I know, what are you supporting bhikkhunis for? Why did you allow the bhikkhuni ordination? Because it was the Buddha's mission. He wanted it from the very beginning, just after his enlightenment. So anyway, are you interested now, paying attention? Good. Fault finding is not a good thing. But if one is hurt because of a wrongdoing of someone closer to him, how can one face that situation? If someone is trying to avoid you, maybe because of guilt, what is the best thing to do? To move away? To forgive and forget? You don't forgive and forget. You forgive and learn. And forgiveness is not allowing yourself to be a target again. You know the danger signs and you move away, but they've hurt you once. Why do you allow them to hurt you again? By holding on to fear or holding on to anger. If you have ill will, that really hurts you inside. And the anger also is a big obstacle to your peace and freedom in meditation. Why do you allow people to keep controlling you? So instead you forgive. You still have to protect yourself, and then you can actually solve the situation. There are some times when just forgiving is not enough. If that's someone really close to you, like a mother or a father, or like a partner in life, it's very difficult. Someone asks for forgiveness, and you say, well, look, I can't trust you anymore. No, are you never going to do that again? So that's why I developed this forgiveness, more than just forgiveness, but forgiveness with parole. So I did this for this couple, and she was just sending his suit to the dry cleaners. And when she was looking at the suit, she found there was a receipt there for a brothel. He was visiting ladies of, I don't really like calling it ill repute, but anyway, you know what I mean, to a prostitute. And she called him out. And so they both came to Bodhinyana Monastery across the road, and to try and settle this. She said, it has to be a divorce, I can't stay with him any longer. I don't trust him. And he said, look, it was a mistake. I still really love my wife. Now, can she please forgive me? I'll never do this again. Has that ever happened to you or something similar? Can you trust a person when they cheated you once? And so, you had to be innovative. So I said, okay, you really want, to prove to your wife you're never going to do that again. So we negotiated the terms of parole. He first of all said, I suggested 6 months, and she said, no, 1 year. We compromised at 9 months, I think. And he had to, when she asked, if he came home late from anywhere, he had to have a paper trail, documentary proof of where he'd been. She was allowed to get all of his passwords and check his mobile phones and tablets and computers whenever she wanted for 9 months. And that's what he had to accede to. So he could prove himself. And he did that. And he kept his word. And so they're back together. And they come to the temple regularly. Still come with a lot of gratitude. And they saved their relationship. He made a stupid mistake. When you make a stupid mistake, you ask forgiveness. You have to prove you'll never do that again. Does that make sense? Anyway, it's nice to see them together anyway. And they've been good food, so I'm very glad they're back to the monastery. If it's something more violent, I always think that we don't agree with the punishment, but if somebody's violent, it's like a disease. Why on earth would you abuse, a child or a parent or a partner? So if it's abuse, then maybe just parole is not good enough, but be able to get some help. It's like a disease, and so you need sort of psychological, psychiatrical help. And that's how I always feel that, for prisons should never be looked upon as punishments, but as places for reform. So you can not be punished and stay in cells and learn more ways of breaking the law and getting away with it, but being able to actually learn from there and make sure you never want to do those things again. Anyway, dear Ajahn, I've experienced small insights like seeing myself as a child, as a teenager, a mature person, a very old person. So it must be some of the old people here. Which one was it? Who's oldest? These may be just visions from a past life, who knows? They have just appeared and disappeared in seconds. Is this part of the mind quietening down? Thank you. If it just comes and goes in seconds, it's interesting, but the best part of the mind quietening down is when anything lasts for a long period of time. It doesn't suddenly appear and then disappear. It kind of appears and it just stays there. It gives you more opportunity to investigate it, what it is. And it gives me the opportunity to tell this story. I meant to tell it to someone this afternoon or yesterday. It was a time when I was meditating and used to get some interesting nimittas coming up. And the first time they started coming, and one of those nimittas was a very complex nimitta. I don't know if I've told it already. Towards this end of the retreat, I don't just teach here, I give talks and advice over in Bodhinyana Monastery and other places. But this was the case that when I was meditating, this image came up in my mind of a monster. I was sitting there, the eyes were closed and getting very peaceful, and I saw this monster in front of me. And this monster, first of all, I know this was a long time ago because this monster had spiky hair. Before that became fashionable. I couldn't believe it later on. In the punk culture, they started having spiky hair. Had spiky hair, and his eyes were bulging, like almost popping out of his head. And he didn't have like teeth, he had fangs. They were all sharp. And he also was scowling, ugh, and have a necklace of skulls. It looked really scary. So what did I do? One thing I know about nimittas, they are kind of created, and you have power over them to mess around with them. Just like at school when I was a kid, sometimes you have a picture in the book and you doodle on it. You know what doodling is? You get a pen and you put horns in it or a moustache on it. And so with this monster, first of all, I put a straw hat over its spiky hair. And with the straw hat, a little flower coming out. And then over its bulging eyes, which look really scary, I put sunglasses. So it started to look cool rather than being angry. And then its mouth, with the sharp teeth, I blacked out a few teeth, so it looked like it needed to go to the monster dentist. And even I put a cigarette in its mouth. And around its neck with the skulls, I put a scarf. And that monster instead of being scary, once I finished with it, it looked so ridiculous. I totally humiliated it. And that's why I never came back. Monsters don't like me. Instead of getting scared, I humiliate them, make them look so foolish. That's how it disappeared. So remember all these nimittas, you can actually mess around with them if you wish, if you're skilled at them. Does it actually grow and spread to this part of the body and other parts of the body? Does it sort of feel wonderful or feel terrible? Exactly how it feels. What is it close to? What's it like? Boredom is such an interesting subject. If you start to analyze it and explore it, it's so fascinating. Boredom is interesting. You understand where I'm going with this? Why don't you write a PhD thesis on boredom? If you title it boredom, then no one will read it. They think it's boring. But instead, put a few jokes on boredom. Imagine you can start a boring society where everybody can go and listen to boring lectures. Imagine getting your university to actually start a course on boredom. See how many students turn up. Okay. So please explain the feeling of boredom. Boredom, like most other things, you can make interesting. You can have like a boring competition. See how many, like the boring Olympics, you can get the contestants, from the United States, from Australia, from Sri Lanka and from Malaysia, to give a speech and find out who's the most boring. And if you can talk for a long period of time and everybody walks out, then you can win the competition. You get the boring gold medal. Would that be a good thing to have? Shall I show you how it's done? I'm now going to speak very boringly, and I'm not going to make any jokes, and it's going to be in a low monotone. That reminds me of a story. Here it comes. You can exploit boredom. So there was this new monk. Oh, the sound's come up. A new monk, and this new monk starting a temple, and because he was not well known yet, it meant that he didn't get many donations. So he thought, I'm not going to be able to pay the bills with this little donations. So he went to a senior monk, and the senior monk gave him all the tricks and the tips. He said, look, it's very easy. Same thing happened to me when I started a temple, said this senior monk. All you need to do is, before you give the talk, close all the windows. You've got all the windows closed. Make sure it's very hot inside the hall. And give a very, very, very boring sermon. And that's what he did. So, I won't do this yet, but I'll do it on the last day. And give a very, very, very boring sermon. And then you'll find that many of the people, because it's hot, and it's late at night, and a boring sermon, they'll start to get sleepy. And when they start to get sleepy, I haven't got one here, but I can borrow one next time, get out like one of these fob watches and swing it backwards and forwards and tell everybody, you're getting sleepy, you are becoming tired, and get them all hypnotized. And once they're all hypnotized, then you tell them, before you go out of the hall, you will give a donation. Not coins, not $5, or $10, or 20s, or 50s. Only $100 notes. Just hundreds, nothing else, each one of you. And then this young monk, I can't do that, that's fraud. And the older monk says, it's not fraud, it's encouraging people to make good karma. What's wrong with that? So he tried it, and it worked perfectly. That evening, his donation box was full of $100 notes. It disturbed the spiders, but it's only one day. And he thought, wow, this really works. So the next time he gave a talk, he didn't try that trick anymore, otherwise they'd soon guess that something was going on. So when he needed to pay some expensive bills again, he turned up the heat in the hall, closed all the windows, gave the most boring talk ever heard. That's why being able to give a boring talk can be very helpful sometimes. And when everyone was almost falling asleep, he got out his fob watch and backwards and forwards. As you're watching the stick go left and right, you're falling under my power, under my control. And he's just about to say the instructions that you'll put only $100 notes into the donation box. But then he was getting so into it, he actually dropped the stick. And he couldn't help himself. He said, oh shit. And that's what they did. And it took about 3 or 4 weeks to clean up the hall. So that's why it's best not to actually to do those stupid things of trying to get money by illicit means. Well, anyway, that's my talk on boredom. Okay, to Ajahn, you said you had resolution not... you had a resolution not getting sick for 1 year. What is the difference between resolution and adhitthana? Same. Adhitthana is like the Pali word for determination, resolution. You decide this is what you're going to do. But you said that adhitthana is just training your will and become stronger. Yeah, I didn't really know what my will was at that time. But nevertheless, I made a resolution just to see if it worked. And I was actually surprised at how powerful the mind can be and how powerful the will can be. And even if you don't sort of force it, but you have like a peaceful, good mind. By the way, how do we know that when we've got sick, that's because the mind, or it's just because of karma? The mind influences karma. This is one of the things, I love having these arguments with people. So you've made some bad karma. Do you have to pay it off? In other words, can you not get enlightened and free before you've burnt off all your past bad karma? Why is it when we talk about karma, we only talk about bad karma? One of the things which really interested me, it's said, explained, if you do a really kind act, like, you give a monk some condensed milk with his cup of tea, which is the ultimate of kindness, isn't it? No, you do a really kind act, you really help someone. And sometimes I've seen some beautiful acts of kindness. It's really inspiring. Sometimes those acts of kindness, they're not paid back like one for one. It's paid off like many times over. You do a good act of kindness, you get that back 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. Same with bad karma. So if you think of all of the karma you've done over many lives, it becomes impossible to pay back all the bad karma you've done. It it becomes impossible to get the rewards from all the good karma you've done. You've got like this huge bank account of goodness and badness. So how does that work? And the point is, you don't have to pay off the bad karma. You can't actually pay it off with your good karma. You can dilute it, the Buddha said. But what happens is you learn how to let things go. Whole heaps of stuff. When you realize what non-self is, and you really, not as a theory, but really understand it, you realize all those stuffs which you do, sometimes it's just how you're being conditioned, what was possible. And so in the end, you can free yourself from both the good karma and much of the bad karma as well. You can go lightly through this world. And your actions, by body, speech or mind, become so slight, they don't affect you anymore. You become free of the burden. You've done what had to be done. And not just bad karma won't affect you anymore, but the good karma may be there, but you don't need it. Do you understand? It was one thing which really surprised me. A person who is a stream winner, they can never get reborn into a lower realm ever again. They're free from that. Why not? That's unfair. They've done some bad things. Don't they need to pay their debts off first of all? It's more like when you go to university and you have these HECS debts over in Australia, and many young people are concerned about that because they say they want to become a monk or a nun, but if you have any debts, you're not allowed to become a monk or a nun. Pay off your debts first. But the rules in Australia are quite clear that you only have to pay off your debts for your education only if you have enough money to pay them off. If you don't have that money, if you become a monk or a nun, you don't have to pay it off. Am I right? Yeah. That's really kind. So if you don't want to go to work and pay off all these debts, is that fair? If you become a stream winner, and you see the Dhamma, you see non-self, then any mistakes you've made, you can let them go. You've learned. You don't need to be punished or pay back. You've learned and you can be free. So if you've got lots of karmic debts, you better become a stream winner quick. How can we forget or let go of those close people, relatives, friends, etc., who have got no respect and or gratitude for what we have done for them? Or is it materialistic or spiritual support? I don't know what you mean there, but anyway, if you do anything for anybody, you don't expect anything good back in return, because it's just good doing it. You do it for the sake of doing it, not for getting anything back. It's a privilege to do something. Just one of the things I remember, I'm just always trying to think of examples to make it clear. I was walking through Singapore airport one day, and walked through there many times because that's kind of a hub for me, going here, going there. And I saw this lady. She was laying down on one of the benches, just turning this way and that way. She was obviously trying to go to sleep, but it was disturbing for her, too noisy, too bright. So I did have a pair of the eye shades, which I asked for from the Singapore Airlines, so I could have a sleep. And so I saw her, and I felt a bit of compassion for her. So I reached into my bag, got out the eye shades, said, "Here, have these, this might help." She'd never seen me before. And she said, "Oh, thank you." And then she put them on, and then she went. I went, sorry. And I never asked her for any money. I did it just for the joy of doing it. Don't you love actually giving when people don't expect it? You have something and you don't really need it, and you give to someone who really does. You know, I do get a lot of joy. It's not just a game, that when I come into this hall and you're holding the door open for me, and I walk in and I walk out again immediately, and then I hold the door open for you. I don't get anything out of that except joy and happiness. That's what sort of, you don't think you're getting acclaim or you're getting sort of any privileges out of this. Now, why did I build Jhana growth? It just needed to be done, that's all. Dear Ajahn, in one of your talks on YouTube, you talked about let go of letting go. That's just because I had a stammer. Let go of letting go, or letting go. No, it's not that. That's one of the monks. He told me this story today. If you don't want to hear this, please put fingers in your ears. He said that one of his friends was put in prison and stayed in prison for a long time because he had a very bad stammer. He could never finish a sentence. I warned you. That was Nibuto. I did promise I was going to tell it. At this point in our retreat, can you please expand on this? Let go of letting go. Like, let go of trying to let go. So that's why sometimes people ask this, and it's a beautiful question. How do you let go? And if you try to figure out that question, you just get really sort of messed up in your head. So instead of thinking of letting go as something you do, I prefer to start, I have explained this already, of that tying it up to unconditional love. The door of my heart is open, unconditionally, no matter what happens. Have you had nimittas yet? Or jhanas? Are you enlightened yet? There's only another few days to go. Anything worked yet? How about trying, open the door of your heart and keep it open for the next few days, unconditionally. Whatever wants to come in can come in, whatever wants to go out can go out. So you don't control anything. You don't decide what happens. You're just sitting there, giving up all wanting and ill will. That's called letting go. Opening the door of your heart, no matter what happens. If you have a little bit of like a deal going, okay, I'll open the door of my heart unconditionally, as long as I get enlightened tomorrow. Otherwise, my door of my heart's going to be shut. I'll let go if it works. If it doesn't work, so you have to let go of letting go. That's what it means. It's not a sort of a skillful means to get what you want. How do I know that light comes up with moderate strength is a nimitta, or my mind's perception? A nimitta is a perception. Call it a nimitta. Give it the benefit of the doubt. It's similar to this guy. He was one of our ethic committee members. When he first came into Perth, and he told me that he could not meditate on the breath. He couldn't. He tried and tried and tried and tried. It was impossible for him. But then one day he found this amazing teacher, and this amazing teacher gave him this great instruction. If you can't meditate on the breath, imagine. Close your eyes, imagine you're meditating on the breath. Just imagine, don't do it. Just imagine, what would it be like to meditate on the breath? And so he followed those instructions, he imagined meditating on the breath. And then the teacher interrupted him, what are you watching? And he had to be honest, he was watching the breath. When he tried to watch the breath, he couldn't do it. When he imagined he was watching the breath, he could. He's a great psychologist, that teacher. So, what's it like to see a nimitta? Don't try and see one, imagine one. If you imagine this beautiful nimitta in your mind, beautiful light, with lots of happiness and lots of joy, just incredibly beautiful and bright. If you stay like that for a while, you'll have to admit that is a nimitta. You're creating these, which is beautiful. They become so gorgeous that the other senses, they just diminish in the background. If you are an Aryan or someone who has practiced loving kindness to a high degree, does metta emanate from you naturally? From who? You're not there. But sometimes people feel this, and I know this because I've experienced this many times. You only need to focus and radiate metta to go into stillness or radiate to boundless space, as said in the Metta Sutta. I don't bliss out or see the golden light when radiating metta these days, nor can I get into the feeling of it. Just is it because I need to work out on more metta for myself? You never say myself or for others. You always say loving kindness for always us. You're always in it together. That's that simile which, I always say when I do wedding blessings. When I say the wedding blessing, I did that a couple of days ago, and I told the bride, you're a married woman now. You must never think of yourself anymore. She gets that straight away. And then the guy, you're a married man, you mustn't think of yourself. If he's an Australian, this is just my experience, many years. He always hesitates. Honest, this is what I've observed, my experience. But he eventually gives in. He said, yeah, okay, I won't think of myself anymore. And then I love it. If you haven't heard this before, I love saying it. Then I look at him and said, and from today on, you must never think of your wife. And the nicest thing of this is they may have heard me say this before, but their relations haven't. And you can actually just at the corner of your eye see them looking at each other. Who's this guy blessing our kids' marriage? He's absolutely crazy. But he has to agree. He says, yeah, okay. And then I look at the wife, and from today on, you're a married woman, you must never think of your husband from today on. And it's wonderful when you see the families, they go silent. It's a wonderful teaching technique. Say something they can't understand. But they respect me enough to try and think out what does this crazy bald-headed monk mean. And then of course you know the answer. The solution is once you're married you must never think of yourself. You must never think of your partner. You must only think of us. And I love that when we go to the controversy between Mahayana and Theravada. Which one is the most correct? Are you just supposed to think of yourself so you can get enlightened quickly? And I've told that story. I've got to be careful who I tell these stories to, because sometimes they think, oh, this is just a selfish Theravada monk. And I said, the Hinayana are only supposed to be interested in their own enlightenment. And that's actually what they criticized Theravada for. And said, well, you're Mahayana, you're supposed to be interested in? And actually making it easy for other people to become enlightened. Okay, well that's me. So I want you to serve me and look after me and give me all the food I like and make sure I don't have to work so hard. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? May other beings be enlightened before you are? So I'm going for it. So come on, serve me. And they get upset. And I say, that's not what we do. We don't just give to others. We don't just get for ourselves. It's always about us. When you actually say that and you mean it. I remember this nun from the Fo Guang Shan temple years ago. We had all these lovely conferences. And her name was Yifa. I don't know if you know her, I remember her, Venerable Yifa. Monks, you know what our monks are like. They said, oh, they called her not Yifa, but Yiha. And it was actually almost like praising her because she was really outspoken. And it was actually her who actually at one of the conferences which I organised here in Perth, when I said, well, ordination of bhikkhunis, that's kind of a controversial matter. I have to do some more research on that. And then she got up to the microphone and said, Ajahn Brahm, you're being too patronising. You should actually take responsibility. If you think they should be ordained, then do it. And I respected her so much, and to this day, I say that she was one of those people who incited me to do a little bit more research and just to check on my motivations more and put aside any fear and do that. So I praised her for that. But then afterwards, on another conference where we presented together, I asked her, what are you doing? She said, just giving talks and going to conferences. Haven't you got any disciples? She said, no. And I told her, look, I'm more Mahayana than you are. But she still didn't do anything. But anyway, I respected her. Anyway, next question. Did I answer those questions okay for you? Okay, anyway. How do I encourage my wife to pursue the Eightfold Path and meditate more? She sees meditation as a chore. I believe the Buddha mentioned that one has to first pull oneself out of the quicksand in order to pull someone else from the quicksand. Does this mean I have to be a stream winner? Good idea. In order to help my wife live a more peaceful and contented life, that is possible through a path of Buddhism. A lot of time it has to be all done together. So if your husband and wife sort of actually come, especially to retreats. I love telling stories like this. Sometimes the husbands, they think they're more interested in watching a football match or a cricket match if they're Sri Lankan than going to the temple. But when you actually tell them the power of meditation and how it affects a cricket match, then they get interested. And this is not just a joke story. Many years ago, we had a Sri Lankan cricket team were playing the Australian team in a one-day match at the West Australian cricket ground, what we used to call the Wacker. And at the lunch interval, the Sri Lankan cricket team were doing terribly. And they were just so desperate that they sent a couple of the boys who were, helping with the arrangements at the Wacker to go to Nolamara temple and ask the monk there for some pirit string, the thread they put around people's wrists. And when I was at university, I never actually played cricket, I just watched it. I was not competitive enough. It's much more fun watching cricket than playing it, but I knew all about cricket. So I made 12 pieces of string, but there's only 11 people play. They have the 12th man. So I did the 12 pieces of string for them, and they sent them to the WACA, and the Sri Lankan cricket team put them on. They lost. But that's not the end of the story, because that particular game was just a warm-up match for the World Cup. And what year was that? You remember that? You don't remember the year when we had a big fire when the nuns were ordained? When you won a cricket tournament, you remember that? And okay, fair enough. When the cricket match, the final of that World Cup cricket was eventually between Sri Lanka and Australia. And Australia had a very good cricket team. But then, on that game, just the underdogs who were the Sri Lankans, they won. They beat Australia. Well, the Australians were very upset and disappointed. And in Sri Lanka, it was like the first time they've ever won a big tournament. And they were just celebrating, big time. And I remember in the front page of the West Australian newspaper, somebody showed me, there was a big picture of the Sri Lankan captain, Ajahn Brahm, I still remember his name, holding up the World Cup. An impossible task had been completed. No one ever thought they could do this. And then as he was holding up the cup, because his hands were high, I saw on his wrist. What do you think I saw there? My string. The whole Sri Lankan team were wearing that string. They won the World Cup cricket. They beat Australia because an Australian monk had given them the string. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? What am I going to do now? If the if the Australian government had found out why the Australian team had lost, I think they'd have cancelled my passport and sent me off as a terrorist. But even the team, sort of said that something was happening. And recently they had another World Cup tournament. And I did tell a few people, I think I did tell you, that the coach at the latest tournament, he used to be the player of the final, the batsman, Jayasuriya. And the Jayasuriya, he's a very good batsman, and he won the player of the tournament, I think. And now he was their coach. So he called up, I don't know if you saw him when he came to Nolamara Centre. He came up and he said, is it okay if we have some more string? So I gave him 12 more pieces of string. But this time, my heart wasn't in it. I was very careful to make sure that no one found out. So they lost that. But I don't know, is that really bad, me blessing cricket teams?
No, depends which one.
But I do also remember, you had the Women's World Cup soccer recently? I know when that was on over here in some of the games in Perth, mostly in Australia, this lady came, I'd never seen her before. She was the head coach of the Colombian women's team. And she said she listens to the talks done in Nolamara, even in Colombia. These talks, they go a long way. And so she asked me, please, can you do some chanting for us? The Colombian women's soccer team were playing that, I think, the next day in Perth. So of course I did. And I checked that Colombian team won that game that night. It was the only game they won. They should have come every night to ask for blessing. Does it work? Who's playing what next? Everyone gives them blessing. Dear Ajahn, from your teachings I understand forgiveness is one of the main things in Buddhism. Well, not one of the main things, but one of the beautiful things where it stands out. Please advise, thank you. A good example of that, one of these other silly stories, but it wasn't actually silly, it was actually good. There was, years ago, an anagarika. Just a new anagarika came to Bodhinyana monastery, and one morning he wanted to have a private chat with me. What's happening? And he said, look, I think I may have to leave. I said, why? You're doing a good job. He said, because the night before he got so hungry, he went into the kitchen, he made himself a sandwich, and he ate it. He's in training to be a monk, and he broke the rules. And of course you know how I would respond. I say, okay, just don't do it again. There's all this other stuff you can eat in the evening. You can eat chocolate bunnies. I finished that one off today. Did you have any?
Yeah, I opened the next one.
You have dark chocolate, you can have cheese, you can have honey, fruit juice. There's so many things you can have. And I told him all the things which were okay. And also eat more at lunch. If you eat more at lunch, you don't feel hungry in the evenings. So I gave him all the advice, and he was listening. But he said, Ajahn Brahm, that's not good enough. He said, I need to be punished. He said, that's my character. If you don't punish me, I'll do it again. I know, that's what I'm like, he said. So it really put me on the spot. And so I had to think of a punishment for him. But it wasn't that hard, because it just happened, kind of coincidence. I've been reading a book on the history of Australia. They said in the old days, they had all these convicts sent to Australia. And if they did anything wrong, they were viciously whipped with this cat of nine tails. I just happened to be the night before reading about that. So I told this anagarika wearing white, well, if you really have to have a punishment, I'll give you a traditional, because monks are traditional, a traditional Australian punishment. And I told him I will give him 50 strokes of the cat. You should have seen his face. His face went whiter than the clothes he was wearing. And his lips started to quiver. He didn't know me that well at all. He thought I was going to flog him. And then I told him in a Buddhist monastery what 50 strokes of the cat mean. At that time, we had two cats, the Kit Kat and I think Mick Cat. Find one of the cats, put it on your lap and give it 50 strokes. 1, 2. Learn some compassion and kindness. That is your punishment. Not something which hurts you, but something which can teach you. We don't have any cats in monastery now because they were eating too many birds. So these days, if you want a punishment because you've broken some rule, I usually give you 50 strokes of the teddy bear. Find one of the teddy bears. 1, 2. Learn some softness and kindness. It's much more effective than punishment. So anyway, that's how I taught the Anagarika about how to forgive with kindness. Dear Ajahn, they say it is good to express healthy anger. Who says? That makes me very angry to hear that. You know, sometimes people say those things, and some of those things I totally disagree with. For e.g., when your boundaries are violated, you feel angry, and it helps you to say something, to do something, to protect yourself. My boundaries are often encroached upon. Honestly, have you seen me get angry? Or heard me get angry? Instead of getting angry, I have some great fun when I get into trouble like that. Did I tell you about the Kung Fu episode? I told it to somebody, I think, in the interviews. The Kung Fu episode? No? Okay. So I was visiting my mum in the UK, she was still alive, and in the evenings I was helping out by teaching at the Sri Lankan temple, which was in Chiswick. And that was actually my stomping ground as a young man. And I always remember from that experience that I never knew that temple existed. Because all the monks there's some great monks there, they would go to places in cars. They would never use public transport, they'd never walk, and so I'd never see them. So when I was a young monk over in England and visiting or something, I'd always go on walks. I'd always try and use public transport. I had some wonderful experiences on public transport as well. I remember being on one of the underground trains one morning, and they were just minding my own business as you're sitting there, and then this lady came and sat next to me, and the conversation continued like this. And she said, "Are you a monk?" I said, "Yes." "A real monk?" I remember that. I said, "Yeah, I'm a Buddhist monk, I'm a real Buddhist monk. Would you mind if we just discuss something about Buddhism?" And so she wanted to know something about, the Dhamma, and what we were up to. So I had a brief conversation, and then we got on to the subject of rebirth. And when we mentioned that, I said, "Well, look, it's interesting you say that, because recently, here on one of these retreats in Jhana Grove, they had this guy, he was Italian Buddhist, and he was telling me about these nimittas he was having in the interviews. And he said this one time that had a really strange nimitta, that he really thought he imagined or he saw himself as a strand of spaghetti. And I must admit, I'd never heard that before. And then the next day, it got even weirder. He could actually see himself as a piece of macaroni. I mean, that's kind of strange. And then I told this to this lady, and then I finally figured out what he was observing. He was recognizing I can't help myself. He was recognizing his past lives. He's an Italian. That's actually how the conversation went. And when I said that, if you've ever been in public transport in London, everybody, in the old days used to be always watching and reading newspapers. These days, always watching their mobile phones. And I looked at, about 2/3 full. All the people on the public transport, they all looked up at me. Half of them groaned. Ugh. The other half laughed. But I had their attention. So that was their meeting with a Buddhist monk. And they all were listening. That was the amazing thing. Because I never expected to hear a stupid story like that. But that's really nice. So anyway, what did I go on that one for? Okay, when I was also visiting my mother, So one evening I was going to give a talk at the Sri Lankan temple, and as I was walking to that Sri Lankan temple, I must admit I should have known better. There was a very rough area of South Acton, and that was a very poor housing estate. And even then, there were many sort of violent people lived in that housing estate. They were incredibly poor, and they formed gangs. And as I was walking down the road, I saw that there was a gang of youth starting to congregate. And as they saw me, now imagine, they hadn't got much of a clue who I was. This bald-headed young man, I was much younger in those days. I was much younger before. And they saw this young man walking towards them with a bald head and brown robe. So they looked at me and they tried to intimidate me. Just have some fun. So they started chanting, Buddha, Buddha, Buddha. And the frequency got higher as I got closer and louder. Buddha, Buddha, Buddha. And I knew I was kind of in trouble. There's many of them, only one of me. And I thought, this can be very physically dangerous. They could beat me up just for fun. And so I knew my way around that area. This is where I grew up. I could cross over the road or turn around and go another way. But I thought, no, that's not what I'm going to do. So I walked towards them. And the number of people, about 10, 11, 12 or 13, 14, I can't remember the numbers. They were big, strong and violent. Buddha, 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 Buddha. Louder. And as I became closer to them, that's when I did this pose. Because I saw this the TV movie of Kung Fu when I was a kid. I didn't really know what I was up to, but I pretended. And these hoodlums, that's what they were, they hadn't got a clue whether I was a legitimate Kung Fu expert, but they saw the brown robes, bald head, lack of fear. This is honest, what happened? There's about a dozen of them by this time, and they parted, and I walked right through them. They couldn't touch me. I often wonder, was I really stupid, or was that... It was a lovely story to be able to tell. It's only mostly because you didn't have any fear. That was the most important part of it. So we don't need to express anger. I don't think any anger is healthy. And you don't need to say something or do something to protect yourself. If you have fearlessness, which is not anger at all, no one can really hurt you. According to the Dhamma, are we not supposed to express even that type of anger? If you don't have it, how can you express it? It's just not there. There's much easier ways and much more fun ways of dealing with such difficulties. Even once, I remember one of the other stories I was going to tell you. Actually, two stories. One is entertaining, one is actually just a little... I'll do the serious one first. I used to go and teach at the prison down in Bunbury. When I used to teach down there, the time of the teaching slot was in the evening. So I had usually a free afternoon. And the beach down at Bunbury was very quiet, during the weekdays, and so I used to go down there and meditate. And so I was on there just meditating, just minding my own business. No one was around. And as I was meditating, I think I just about started, because I wasn't deep yet, and I heard something flow right past my ear. And I thought it was kind of interesting. And then another thing flew past the other ear. And then I heard the sound of someone shouting at me, "Get off our beach, Rajneeshi." And I realized what was happening. That was a time when Bhagavan Sri Rajneesh was threatening to build and I had a bald head, brown robe. They thought I was a follower of Bhagavan Sri Rajneesh. And another stone flew past. And I realized their aim was getting better. So what should I do? What would you do? You get up and run away? Again, it's not my way. So I got up, turned around, and walked towards them. And they were the ones who ran away. It was really crazy. If you don't show any fear, other people get really terrified of you. But one of the boys stayed. And I went up to him and just said, "Look, I'm not a disciple of Sri Rajneesh. I'm a Buddhist monk and just come to sit quietly to meditate." And I explained what meditation is. And then all the other guys who was with him at the time, throwing stones, they all came back to listen. And so I just had a lovely conversation about Buddhism, and that was kind of the end of it. But the other time was even more scary. I don't know, just me telling you these stories. But anyway, I was sitting on the beach, closed my eyes, and this time I was meditating for a couple of hours. It was really nice and peaceful. Nice. It wasn't hot, it was kind of warm, but it was a nice, pleasant place to meditate. When I came out of meditation and I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed that someone was sitting on my left and someone else sitting on my right, next to me. This is totally honest. When I turned to my left, there was a 17-year-old, blonde, long-haired, beautiful girl in a bikini sitting next to me. And I turned to my right, there was a brunette, also 17-year-old, in a bikini, that's all, and sitting next to me. If someone had taken a photograph of me, especially that time, some of these Thai monks were up to mischief. How on earth can you explain that? And when I asked what had happened, was that this was, I think, in November, there was a high school on the opposite side of the road to the beach. And these year 12s had just finished their, in those days, I think TEE exams or something, the university entrance exams. They'd done the last exams. And I could see there was more people in the surf, swimming and having a good time. They finished school. Year 12 was over. They'd done their exams and they were celebrating. So what do? They change into their bathers and go to the beach, do some surfing or swimming. But these two girls, they saw me, this monk, who was just sitting there, just like a Buddha statue, not moving. And they sat next to me because they said they were waiting for me to come out of meditation to ask, how I did this, what was happening. And they were really interested because they'd watched me and sat right next to me for about, an hour or so. And then, so I thought they deserved an explanation and a talk, but also I made sure it was short. It's the sort of trouble you get into as a monk. Totally innocent, but then, what would other people think? What would you think if you saw me with a beautiful girl in a bikini on my left and a beautiful girl on my right? I don't know how I could explain that. But it was totally innocent. Do you believe me? I think you do, you know me. I wouldn't say if you didn't trust me. Okay. So anyway, something back in the wrong box. It's not anger, it was just some of these things. Anger doesn't make any sense to me, honestly. You just talk to a person. And if they're mad or crazy, yeah, just walk away or run away or protect yourself. But getting angry just makes you stupid. Dear Ajahn, how does one let go of the sense of self? Easy. Just what is the sense of self? Where does that illusion come from? It's always reinforced by things like, you go to the airport, what's your name, sir? And you say, I don't have a name. People know me as Brahma Wangso. I'll write that down. Look, I had some wonderful times with that. The full story, if you haven't heard it, that once, a few years ago, I'm 73, 74 this year, and they said at the age of 65, I can't get a pension, but one thing I can get from the Australian government is a Commonwealth healthcare card, which means that the Buddhist Society, if I ever get sick, don't have to pay much money, you get it all subsidised, any medicines. The problem is I don't get sick, so I don't think I've ever used it all these years. But anyway, I got one, I applied for one, and then they said, sir, you can't just get one over the internet, we have to interview you, because there's too many people doing identity fraud. And I don't know why anyone would want to be me. You can if you want. Would you like to? No. Venerable Siddhi Buddha? No. You can stay in a cave. You can actually get the best food. No. You can travel the world. Okay, I'm not selling it. So anyway, I had to turn up at the office of Centrelink over in Armidale. Apologise if you didn't know this story, but it's just such a great story. And I'm telling it accurately. I turned up there and they assigned this senior Centrelink officer to me. I had to sit opposite her. And she said, Mr. Brahma Wangso, the reason we've got you here is because of identity fraud. Can you please prove who you are? And my response, I can't stop myself, I'm sorry. I said, I've been a monk at I think that time for about 48 years or something. And I said, for 48 years I've been trying to find out who I am. I haven't discovered that yet at all. She was not amused. She said, this is serious. Well, I'm serious. 48 years I've been following this path. He said, look, have you got any ID? Can I have a look at your driving license? I haven't got one. Oh, okay. Can I have a look at your credit card? I don't have one either. Your bank statement, where do you keep all your money? I don't have a bank account. You rely on the Buddhist Society of Western Australia. They pay for everything. I don't have a bank account. Okay, can we have a look at your rental agreement? I don't pay any rent to the BSWA. Is that a good thing, Al, that I don't pay rent for my cave? That's all I have, a cave. I don't think that actually fulfills a rentable property. Do you own anything? No. Have you got a motorbike? No. And they did ask, they couldn't stop themselves. Can we see your marriage license? Was it license, or what do they call it when you get married? Marriage certificate. I'm not married. What about where you work? They've got a certificate of employment from the Buddhist Society of Western Australia. You never give me one of those. What about your superannuation fund? You don't give me that either. Your pension fund, don't have one. And all of these things I just didn't have. And that was really good fun. What was she going to ask me next? Don't have anything. And so she looked at me, really serious. She said, Mr. Brahma Wangso, you don't exist. And again, I could not help myself. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. The Buddha was right. She got a bit fed up at me at that point. But no, one thing which I do have, I still have the dual citizenships. I've got a British passport and an Australian passport. She said, I'm not really supposed to accept that, but I am going to accept it, just to get rid of you. So she signed all the forms, stamped them, and I got a Commonwealth Healthcare card in the next post. But I enjoy that. I don't know why. I give people a really hard time trying to prove who I am. Which one is true? Who are you? Venerable Buddha.
Nobody.
Nobody? Do you tell that when you... But it's sometimes it's interesting that when you have, when you really understand what non-self is, how you don't fit in. Do you like fitting in? I think it's interesting when you don't fit in and you haven't got an identity. Then no one can actually do anything to you. Anyway, can mudita be used in breath meditation, or is it more like a primer to bring up joy and happiness before kindness to the body and breath sensation? Of course it can be used in breath meditation. You know, sometimes when I do breath meditation, I take that part of mudita, which is gratitude. Now my breath has been going in and out for the last, how many years? I'm almost 74 years now. It's never let me down once. Even when I pay no attention, I go to sleep. It still goes in and out. And this is not a small thing. I trust my breath. It knows when to go in and when to go out. So that happens sometimes in meditation. You're meditating and the breath disappears, or it doesn't go out. And a lot of people get scared. You don't have to get scared. Even if you can't discern the breath going in or discern the breath going out. I must have told you that story of Ajahn Brahm when he stopped breathing and he was under the care of one of the medics paid for by His Majesty the King of Thailand, and he wanted to intervene. I said, leave him alone. And even though he wasn't breathing, there was still the oxygen remained, his blood remained well oxygenated. There was no problem at all. That's just what happens sometimes in meditation. You just stop breathing. There's nothing wrong. That's why in this meditation stuff, there's amazing things happen with the body which aren't supposed to happen, but they do, and it's all fine, no problem at all. Anyway, next question. Dear Ajahn, I see a sphere of purple light and then a vast three-dimensional space. This is when you get abducted by aliens. No, I shouldn't. No, it's well done. Sorry, please. This is a proper nimitta. Well done. Who was that Anagavika's name whose partner did get abducted? Because one day, always looking for new subjects to teach people at Nolamara. So sometimes I've given some really weird talk, like I've given a talk at Nolamara, Buddhism and Bananas. It's a really good talk. Buddhism and coffins. That was a good talk too. But this particular time, it was Buddhism and abductions by aliens. It got people interested, but what I was fascinated by was afterwards, during the question time, then a few people, when it came to asking something, they said, 2 or 3 people, yes, they said, they were abducted by aliens. And straight away, these were people in our Buddhist society, who were just ordinary people. You never suspect them of having any psychological problems at all. They're people you know for some time. And then they said, thank you actually for listening to us and not feeling that we were crazy people. And in particular, one of the reasons why I respected their questions and their claims was because we had an anagarika at Bodhinyana Monastery. I don't think he lasted. But nevertheless, the reason he could become an anagarika was, he had a close partner, and his partner had claimed that she had been abducted. She was, a really good person, and she could speak, when she came back, she could speak this language, which no one else could speak. And she was interviewed on TV by one of the ABC reporters. Apparently he was quite famous. Even though I don't watch TV, they said his name and I'd heard about him before, because they'd found there was another lady from, I think, Portugal, could have been Spain, and she had also claimed to be abducted, and they could actually, she was the only person in the world who could speak the same language, as far as they could find. And this reporter was kind of really astounded. They brought these two ladies together and they could have a conversation. They knew what each other was talking about. No one else could. And they said it was really quite almost challenging to what you thought was possible. And then what happened later on, she just, they were living together in Perth, and then she just went out to the deli to get some milk or something, and she never came back. There was never any sign of her after that. She disappeared off the face of this earth. And that's what this anagarika told me. That was weird. Be careful as you're walking back tonight. Bump, bump, bump. Something in the sky. No, I don't want to scare you, but life is kind of interesting. And sometimes that just when you expand your consciousness or your perceptions and don't just dismiss things because they're a bit challenging, that gets really quite interesting. Have any of you ever seen an unidentified flying object? I haven't, but I know people who say they have. One of my favourite friends was this Aussie man who was living with Jalkun Mahasamai in Lumia in New South Wales. He became a monk there. And he wrote this wonderful autobiography. The title was From Balmain to Buddha. Because he was born in Balmain, which was a very poor suburb of Sydney. It was where the ship workers lived. And his father was a plumber. And he opened this book with a great first line. Anyone who is born in Balmain, who has his front teeth by the time he's 3 years old, is a female. All the men have fights, and they lose their front teeth. It was one of the toughest of neighbourhoods. So anyone who has their front teeth, and maybe about 6 years of age, maybe 3 years a bit low, there must be a female, because all the guys have fights. But from that he became this really wonderful young man, who eventually became a Buddhist monk. And I remember I read that book because, he was simple fellow, but honest and very kind and very good. And so I remember just reading that, one of his stories, he actually joined the merchant navy, like shipping. And he said that he was on watch one evening, and that there was he was just like a senior, I think, like a bosun, but then had a petty officer had to be with him in the evening on watch, and there was a strange green light on the horizon. And so they were just looking at it. It wasn't threatening, it was a long distance away. And they were discussing, what the heck is this? And then he said, within a moment, that green light came over the boat. They're traveling way faster than whatever was possible. And he'd been like a seaman for so many years. And it was weird. And he said the whole boat was bathed in this green light. And the first officer, or the petty officer, whatever rank he was, went down to wake up the captain. He went into the captain's room, knocked on the door. Took a while for the captain to get out of bed, but then by that time the light had disappeared. But he said it was one of the weirdest things he'd ever seen when he was on watch on ships. And he couldn't help himself. Afterwards he said, this is honest, this happened, but please, where it happened was when the ship was in the area known as Bermuda Triangle. That's where it was located at the time. He said, no, this is not a joke, it happened, he saw it. Have you ever seen aliens? Now, aliens exist. I've seen that because I remember going to Heathrow Airport once. And you go there yourself, you see it. They have, at that time, EU citizens, British citizens, and the other channel was aliens. Okay, I'll behave. Okay, one question. Oh yeah, purple light, yeah, what's it? But I notice that my mind is in idle chatter and sometimes humming a tune without my doing. Should I try to quiet my mind or just keep observing what's unfolding? Many thanks. I would just keep on watching what's unfolding. And if the purple light is beautiful, allow yourself, the opportunity to focus on it. Let it draw you in and see what's happening. These things you see in your mind are not aliens. Aliens don't come to Australia. We're boring. Has any aliens ever come to Australia?
I'm aware of.
They have. Where'd you see them?
I didn't, but...
Oh. Do they tell funny stories and jokes like me?
Might get some new ones.
Might get some new ones. Okay. I'm trying to think of an alien joke now. I know one of those jokes, I've been careful for saying it. I remember it was a cartoon I saw, and these aliens landed, and they wanted to go to seats of power, so they landed in Washington DC. So this alien came out of the spacecraft, and the first person he saw, the alien said to him, "Please take me to your leader." And he said, "The leader, the president, is in the White House just over there. I will take you to him on one condition. You take him away with you in your spacecraft." I thought that was funny, but if you want to put me in jail, please do. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock now. Was that interesting, or was it just too light-hearted? It doesn't really matter because the past is over now. It was what it was. So we've got some more for tomorrow, but not that many more. So many have been done. So thank you for putting the questions in the box again. So we'll finish now. Is that okay? Okay. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. By the way, before you suggest it, the once when I was teaching over in Melbourne, that I was actually invited to get to do a gig at the Melbourne Comedy Club. They said I had excellent timing, I had some interesting material, and they sure I would actually have a good career as a stand-up comic. But I decided to keep my day job.